everyone. So today we are going to be continuing our Empires A to Z series by looking at a scenario where Armenia forms an empire. Armenia is a landlocked nation in the southern Caucasus region of West Asia. It is enveloped by Georgia, Azerbaijan, Iran, and Turkey. The country is primarily a land of mountains and extinct volcanoes, with a few fast-flowing rivers and forested regions. It has a population of roughly 3 million people, and it's the 115th largest economy in the world. Armenia has a rich culture that dates back to antiquity. Archaeological surveys date signs of civilization in Armenia to as far back as 4000 BC or earlier. Around 860 BC, the Iron Age kingdom of Urartu was formed in the region, but was replaced by the satrapy of Armenia around 570 BC. The satrapy of Armenia laid the roots that would become the Kingdom of Armenia, which under the king Tigranes the Great would dominate the Near East from the Mediterranean to the Caspian Sea. In 301 AD, the Kingdom of Armenia became the first nation to adopt Christianity as a state religion. Sadly, the Kingdom of Armenia was not to last, as it was partitioned by the Byzantine and Sassanid empires in 387. From there, the region of Armenia was passed back and forth between the Byzantines, Persians, Arabs, Mongols, and the Ottomans, with very sporadic bouts of independence. By 1800, the region was split, with the Ottoman Empire holding western Armenia and the Persians holding eastern Armenia. Following the Russo-Persian War in 1820, Russia took control over eastern Armenia and encouraged Persian Armenians to return to the region. In 1914, the Ottoman Empire entered World War I, in which Ottoman Armenians became a major scapegoat for Ottoman military failures against Russia. In 1915, the Ottomans began the forced relocation and genocide of Armenians, and what we call the Armenian Genocide. This lasted until 1917, and up to 1.5 million Armenians were murdered, resulting in a lasting hatred between the Turkish and Armenian peoples. Eastern Armenia gained its independence from Russia in 1918, but this lasted only 2 years, as the Soviet Union invaded in 1920, and Armenia became a Soviet republic. This lasted until 1991, when it again gained its independence following the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Since independence, Armenia has had a very tumultuous existence, as it has gone to war with Azerbaijan twice over the ethnic Armenian region of Nagorno-Karabakh from 1988 to 1994, and in 2020. Armenia today is a nation in flux. Following its loss to Azerbaijan in 2020, the Armenian region of Nagorno-Karabakh was eliminated, and tens of thousands of refugees flooded into Armenia, causing a political crisis. This, as well as Russia's inadequate response to the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, has forced Armenia to rethink its relationship with Russia, and the nation is now strengthening relations with Europe and the United States. Before we get too deep into the scenario, I think a little housekeeping is in order. First off, I get that despite my attempts to keep these scenarios grounded in some form of reality, that isn't always possible. I think you guys want a good or fun scenario more than you want a realistic scenario, so I'm having to suspend some bits of reality to make this come to a good conclusion for Armenia. Second, as part of that effort, I believe it is important to mention that most of these videos require that we do away with some major alliances. That generally means that there's no NATO and there's no CISTO. So with the housekeeping done, let's get this show on the road. Despite its recent political issues, Armenia has an economy that has consistently outperformed, but unfortunately, its position between Turkey and Azerbaijan drastically undercuts its stability. The first thing we are going to do with Armenia is allow its economy to continue humming along, as there isn't much else we can do to make it better. Second thing we are going to do is continue Armenia's goals to increase ties with Europe and the United States. In particular, Armenia is going to grow and westernize its military. The Armenian army is going to acquire Western-made systems such as main battle tanks, armored personnel carriers, new artillery systems, as well as shoulder-launched anti-air and anti-tank weapons. The Armenian Air Force will be acquiring a new squadron of multi-role fighters, trainers, UCAVs, and ground-based anti-air systems. While Armenia focuses on itself, its traditional enemy Azerbaijan begins plotting to take more Armenian land. In particular, Azerbaijan hopes to connect to its exclave, Nakhchivan, to the southwest of Armenia. As tensions mount along the border, Azerbaijani artillery begins shelling border towns in Armenia. Azerbaijan declares war on Armenia, and the First Southern Caucasian War begins. Azerbaijani forces push into Armenia from the east along the southern border and take the town of Ernadzor, while forces from Nakhchivan cross the border on the opposite side. Armenia quickly responds and finds a way to hold the strategic town of Agrak in the crucial southern pass near where the Shvanazor and Aras rivers meet. With their southern attack halted, Azerbaijan pushes to take Sak, but are again unable to advance after exiting the mountain. Armenia decides to continue to delay the enemy while it moves its anti-air weapons into position and begins to pacify the skies over Armenia, western Azerbaijan, and Nakhchivan, before it begins its own counterattack. The Armenian army begins its counterattack by focusing on Nakhchivan. They push in from the north and east and quickly take the regional capital. From there, they push on into the southern parts of the region and complete their sweep. Turkey begins to mobilize, but Europe's governments step in, promising swift repercussions to any nation that intervenes, including Turkey. Azerbaijan restarts its offensive and takes the town of Martuni, but at great cost, as the Armenians turn the town into a meat grinder for the attackers. With the majority of the Azeri army in bad shape in Martuni, Armenia flanks around Lake Sevan to destroy the supply lines to Azerbaijan's offensive. Armenia then destroys the Azerbaijani army at Sovenar and begins its own offensive into Azerbaijan proper. They push into the former Nagorno-Karabakh region and reclaim much of the lost territory for themselves. They then begin an advance in the north and form a pincer movement to take the city of Ganja. With their supply lines dwindling, they take strategic villages in southern Azerbaijan up to the Aras and Kuros rivers before halting their attack. The conflict then falls into a stalemate, with neither side able to dislodge the other. The international community steps in, and a peace summit is held in Berlin. Armenia rights the wrongs of the 2020 war and takes the region between the Kuros and Aras rivers, as well as the Nakhchivan region, for itself. Armenia then begins a mass resettlement plan and begins encouraging the Armenian diaspora from around the world to come back to the homeland and live in the newly captured territories. This sees high success, as some 5 million Armenians return over the next 4 decades. While the situation in Armenia drastically improves, its northern neighbor of Georgia finds itself in a crisis. Over the past decade, Russian agents have conducted an extensive operation, sowing bribes and corruption into Georgia's military and law enforcement. As Georgia begins closing in on becoming a full member of the European Union, the Georgia military carries out a coup and places a pro-Russian president into power. Georgia then begins threatening Armenia that it will cut off the flow of trade from the Black Sea ports to Armenia unless it backpedals on its relations with the West. Armenia condemns the new Georgian government and informs them that a trade blockade will be seen as an act of war by Georgia. Despite the warning, Georgia cuts off trade and all relations to Armenia, forcing Armenia to declare war on Georgia. Armenia begins the war by pushing into southern Georgia on 2 fronts. The eastern attack is aimed at the capital, Tbilisi, while the western attack pushes towards the coast. The western column quickly pushes and takes Akhaltsiki before pushing and surrounding Batumi. The column then advances north along the coast and takes the city of Poti. The eastern column advances to take the town of Rustavi, but they are stopped north of the town by the main Georgian army. Batumi falls in the west, and the Armenian army pushes to take Kutaisi. Russia threatens to join, but Armenia agrees to recognize the breakaway republics of Abkhazia and South Ossetia if Russia backs away. Russia agrees, and the Armenian armies push on to encircle Tbilisi. Tbilisi falls, and Georgia capitulates. Armenia takes all of Georgia except for the regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Seeing the Georgian people as cousins, Armenia grants them a high level of autonomy within the empire. As more of the Armenian diaspora return to Armenia, the Armenia Alliance political party sees a surge in membership. Following the annexation of Georgian lands, the party officially adds the United Armenia concept to its list of ideologies and goals. It doesn't take long for the party to gain a majority in the National Assembly and take over the government. This leads to a decision for Armenia to go back to war with Azerbaijan in order to secure its eastern flank before going to war with Turkey. Armenia declares war on Azerbaijan, and the Second South Caucasian War begins. Armenia's declaration comes as a surprise to Azerbaijan, as Armenian forces sweep into the Alazani Valley to the north and the Shirvan Plain to the west. Within days, Armenia destroys the majority of the Azeri forces and is able to bottle up the few Azerbaijani troops remaining on the Baku Peninsula. As the war seems won, Turkey unexpectedly enters the war on Azerbaijan's side. Turkish forces flood into Armenia to take the towns of Batumi and Gyumri. Taken completely off guard, Armenia begins sending reinforcements from the Baku front lines to the west to slow down the Turks. This allows Azerbaijan to push the remaining Armenian forces away from Baku and gain some breathing room. Turkey continues its attack and takes Armavir, just 20 miles from Yerevan, before Armenian forces can stop the assault. Another Armenian heroic stand is made at Poti on the Black Sea, and the Turkish assault is completely halted. Armenian forces then go back on the offensive in the east. Artillery and airstrikes around Baku soften the few defenses remaining and lead to the fall of the city and Azerbaijan capitulating. Forces in the east then move to support the western defenses. The Armenian western counteroffensive is conducted in the Caucasian Pass near Turkgozu. They push to Olsek, before splitting into two separate attacks. The forces heading west strike into the rearguard of the Turkish army to the north to take Sayetler before pushing on to Hopa to cut off the Turkish forces in the north. Meanwhile, the units heading south take Konkavis and cut off the Turkish supply route to their positions in western Armenia. Turkish forces north of Batumi turn south to try to break out, but Armenia keeps the pressure on and the Turks are destroyed on the banks of the Chorak River. Turkish troops pushing on the Armenian capital are forced to withdraw. During the retreat, Armenian forces stage ambushes up and down the main road to slow their withdrawal. A major air battle occurs in the skies over western Armenia, where Armenia gains full control of the skies thanks to ground-based anti-air defenses. Armenian planes and artillery then destroy much of the forces returning to Gyumri. As news of the Turkish defeat in western Armenia spreads, several ethnic minority groups within Turkey rise up in rebellion. The largest minority, the Kurds, are the quickest to begin taking territory in southeastern Turkey. Seeing an opportunity to prosecute the war further, Armenia reaches out to the Kurds and an alliance is formed, with the primary goal being to kick Turkey out of eastern Anatolia. Turkey is forced to divert some of its troops to take on the insurgencies rising up, which allows Armenian forces to sweep into eastern Turkey. Kars falls, and Rise soon follows. Troops from Kars push on to Khorasan, while forces from Rise push to take Trabzon. Kurdish forces consolidate their territories and begin pushing west. They take Batman and Mardin, before pushing on Diyarbakir. Armenian forces push on to take Erzurum and Erzincan. Diyarbakir falls to Kurdish troops, and Armenian forces take Van to connect its front with the Kurds. The Turkish army regroups at Elazig, but the Armenian Air Force bombs the bridges crossing the Euphrates to the west, and the Turks find themselves trapped. The Armenian and Kurdish forces advance towards Elazig and destroy the Turkish forces around the city. The loss of another army leaves the entire Turkish population demoralized, and the people head into the streets of Ankara and Istanbul to protest the war. Rather than face riots and a larger uprising, the government quickly sues for peace. A peace summit is held in Paris, where the Turkish government formally agrees to abide by the borders set in the Treaty of Sèvres. The Kurdish people are finally given their own homeland, called the Republic of Kurdistan. It is made up of territory east of the Euphrates River, south of the Murat River, and follows the old Turkish provincial borders of the Mus, Bitlis, and Van provinces. Armenia gains all the territory east of the Iris River, east of the Euphrates River, and north of the territory given to create the Republic of Kurdistan. And that about does it for Armenia. Now, I know this wasn't the most realistic of scenarios, as the potential for Armenia is rather limited. But with that said, I still think we made a fun scenario and restored Armenia to a higher position in the world. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and if you would, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and tell me what you think of this Armenian Empire by leaving a comment below. Anyways, I'll see you next time as we turn Australia into an empire in Empires A to Z.